I ranked every recovery method from completely useless all the way to non-negotiable, using 3 simple criteria: how much it works, how consistent it is, and how much return you get for the effort you put in. And what I found is the stuff that matters the most is the stuff that people ignore. All right, you guys, so here we are. I got my tier list right here. At the bottom, we're starting with useless tier. It's kind of your F tier. Then low return, situational, solid, high impact, and the best of the best, God tier. So first thing we have right here is our cooling mattress. So I put this in the situational tier, and I'll tell you why. So it actually got kind of a high ranking for its impact. It got a 7, and its consistency, I gave it a 6 out of 10. But the only thing holding it back was its return on investment. I gave that a 3 out of 10. So its total score is 16 out of 10, which is in the situational range. There is evidence that it actually makes a difference, that cooling the body does help with sleep onset and sleep quality. Usually these sleep mattresses, such as the 8 Sleep, which is the one that I have myself, are very expensive and are kind of more of a flex, to be honest. If you can afford it, it's a good thing, but I would definitely focus on the things above it. All right, so we have active recovery. And so I actually gave it a score of a 7 on impact, an 8 on consistency, and a 7 on return on investment. So this 7, 8, and 7 is 22. So I'm putting this in the solid tier. It definitely has an impact. There's a lot of evidence that it improves circulation and helps with stiffness. It also works very reliably. The only thing that it requires is just a little bit of your time. So you need to go walking for like 30 minutes a day. And that's honestly free and is not that hard to do. So the next thing we have is HBOT, or Hyperbaric Oxygen Therapy. So I gave it a 6 on the impact, and a 6 on its consistency, and a 3 on its return of investment. So that gives it a total of 15 out of 30. The reason why I gave it a 6 is because there is actual real evidence that goes to show that hyperbaric oxygen therapy does have an impact when it comes to injury healing. Not as much for day-to-day recovery stuff and muscle recovery, but it definitely has an impact. And to be honest, it is very expensive. You have to pay like hundreds of dollars just for a session, and you would have to go pretty often. So I just don't think it's situational. So if it's for injury healing, then it could be worth it, and if you have a lot of money. But besides that, I'm putting in the situational tier. There are definitely better things for most people. All right, so now the next thing we have is massage guns. And so what I give it, and now this might be a little controversial for some people, the impact, I gave it a 3. The consistency, I gave it a 3, and its return on investment, I gave it a 3. So for a total of 9 out of 10. So I'm putting it in the low return tier. The reason why I gave massage guns such a low score is because there isn't a lot of strong evidence that shows that it actually has an effect on recovery besides your perceived soreness, which some can argue is an effect. But for me, perceived soreness doesn't really move the needle too much. You could do active recovery, which actually does have a real effect, and you don't have to pay anything. Massage guns could be a couple, like $100 to $200. It also takes time. You have to actually massage yourself. I put that in a low return. I wouldn't really recommend it going for it unless like you really, really need it, but I wouldn't buy one for myself, to be honest. All right, so the next thing we have right here is meditation. And so what I gave meditation is I gave it a 6 out of 10 for impact because it does help lower stress. I gave it a 5 out of 10 because it doesn't work for every single person. And to be honest, it also depends on the type of meditation. There are so many different types of meditations out there. For return on investment, I did give it a 6 because it is free. The only thing that it does require is time. Some can argue this could go higher. For certain people, it definitely does, but that's just my opinion. And so this would be putting it at a 17. So that would be putting it at the top of the situational tier. If it works for you, definitely keep doing it. It's definitely worth it. In terms of recovery, just by itself, it doesn't really do anything. Doing active recovery, for like I said before, definitely does a lot more for your body. If you're talking strictly body, it does more. Versus this is more of a stress thing. Micros, so keeping micronutrients. To be more specific with this one, I would be saying you're keeping your vitamins and minerals sufficient. So not letting anything get deficient. For the impact, I gave it a 7 out of 10 because I do believe for certain minerals and vitamins, you do feel a noticeable difference. For example, vitamin D deficiency. Definitely, you will feel a vitamin D deficiency. You'll be noticeably more lethargic and tired. Consistency, I've as far as I know, most people definitely will feel when they're deficient. I know I'm going over this again, but I gave it a 7 out of 10. Consistency, 7 out of 10. In terms of return on investment, I gave it a 7 out of 10 just because, like I said, that deficiency can really catch up to you if you don't take care of your micronutrients, but it can get expensive. So at least taking a multivitamin, usually those aren't too expensive, but it is still a monthly expense. So that's why I gave it a 7 out of 10. So for a total, it has a 21. So I put that in solid. All right, so the next thing we have is naps. I also included with naps NSDR, which is non-sleep deep rest, or yoga nidra. So for its impact, I gave it a 7 out of 10. There is evidence that it shows that it boosts recovery and a little bit of dopamine, so that helps. But for the consistency, I did lower it a little bit. I put it at a 5 because it doesn't always work for everyone. For return on investment, it does take time. Obviously, you need to dedicate time. So for a total of 18. So that's at the back of the pack for solid, but it's still a solid tool to use. I know that there's a lot of athletes that use it, like Eliud Kipchoge, and a lot of Olympic athletes that use napping to help them get more volume and more recovery throughout the day. So it's definitely worth it if it works for you. All right, so the next thing we have right here is sauna. For the impact, I gave it a 7 out of 10. It definitely helps with circulation and relaxation. Consistency, I gave it a 7 out of 10. It's good, but it's not universal. Not everyone's going to feel the benefits, but there are a lot of benefits to it. For the return on investment, I gave it a 5 out of 10 because it does require a bit of time. Not as much time, but it does require a bit of time, and it requires access, which can be expensive. It requires monthly access, and you do have to use it quite often for it to be effective. And so 775 is 19 out of 30, so that puts it right in the middle of solid tier. So it's a pretty decent addition if you have everything else down, but if not, I wouldn't prioritize it. But it is still a solid thing, so just keep it in mind. All right, so the next thing we have is sleep consistency. So basically going to sleep and waking up at the same time every day. For the impact, I gave it an 8 out of 10. There are definitely sleep quality improvements, but they're not as obvious as one might think, but they are there. Consistency, I gave it an 8 out of 10. It pretty much works for most people going to sleep, waking up at the same time. And for return on investment, first 10 out of 10 that we have, the reason why I gave it a 10 out of 10 is because it increases the sleep quality and recovery without having any extra time. It's just free recovery for doing nothing more than you're already doing. So I'm going to be putting it right here at the top of high impact. So that is sleep consistency. So the next thing we have, I know it's very hard to see, but basically it is spa therapies or expensive spa therapies. So things like cryotherapy, halotherapy, infrared, float tanks, etc. So for the impact for this one, I gave it a 3 out of 10. Some have very weak evidence that actually shows that it does something, but most don't do much other than relax you. But relaxation doesn't necessarily translate 100% to recovery, physical recovery. For consistency, I gave it a 3 out of 10. Again, mostly because it's just perception based and there is little measurable effect on most people. The final score being 1 out of 10 for return on investment. Besides just relaxing you, which you can do at home for free, it isn't very worth it and it can be very expensive. So I'm going to be putting it, the outcome is a 7, so I'm going to be putting in the low return tier. Not quite useless, but it's right there in low return. The next thing we're putting is sports massage. For impact, for the sports massage, which is a massage specifically targeted for athletes in recovery, I gave it a 4 out of 10 just because it can reduce some soreness, pretty much like everything else in the low return tier. It is perception based, so it does reduce some soreness. It can improve some mobility, and like everything else, it can reduce some stress, but the effects are almost invisible at this tier. For consistency, I gave it a 5 out of 10 because most people do enjoy a good massage. But for the return on investment, I had to give it a 2 out of 10, slightly a little bit higher than Spa Therapies, just because they probably are moving your body around a little bit. But it's about the same price, maybe a little more expensive, but for a total of 11 out of 10. It's kind of at the top of the low return tier. It's almost touching situational, but I really can recommend it. The next thing we're going to be looking at is this one right here. This says Overhyped Supplements, and these are things like BCAAs, EAAs, glutamine, etc. These are kind of supplements that are really popular on social media, but don't really do as much as you might think. For those specific supplements and others like it, I gave its impact a 3 out of 10, just because at best they are redundant. You don't really need them. And for consistency, I gave it a 2 out of 10, just because for most people it won't work other than placebo. And for the return on investment, they are a 1 out of 10, just because they can get very expensive. If you want to buy all those types of supplements, it will be expensive. So I am putting it in right there. Okay, so right here we have stress management, and more specifically, managing your central nervous system, keeping yourself relaxed, not overworking yourself at work specifically. It's a little bit different than training load. It's more so revolving your mental state more so. So for impact, I gave it a 7 out of 10 because stress kills recovery. If you are constantly stressed out, your body can't wind down at night and it can't recover. For consistency, I gave it a 7 out of 10 because it does depend on the execution. If you can manage your stress well, you will be recovering much better. And for the return on investment, I gave it a 9 out of 10. It has a high return if done right. As long as you're taking care of your mental state and not overworking yourself, you will be fine. So I gave this final score a 23 out of 30. So that puts it in the high impact score. All right. Next thing we have our favorite test boosters. These are the natural test boosters that you find at the gas station or on ads on TV. For its impact, I'm going to give it a 1 out of 10. It literally does nothing, and at most, it will be a placebo. For the consistency, I gave it a 1 out of 10 because pretty much every natural testosterone booster doesn't really do anything. At most, Tongkai Ali, if dosed properly, which 99% of test boosters aren't, is going to maybe make your testosterone jump up a tiny bit. 1 out of 10 for that one. Return on investment, I gave it a 0 out of 10 because usually these things can be very expensive and they don't do anything. So 2 out of 10. 2 out of 30 total. 2 out of 30 total. So the next thing we have right after testosterone booster, which was in the useless tier, I have training management. Training management being not overtraining yourself. A little bit different from stress management. Training management is not overtraining, not giving yourself too much mileage, too much workout time where you're pushing yourself to the brink every single workout. The impact that I gave it was a 9 out of 10 because overtraining is actually shown to crash your hormones, stuff like your testosterone. You literally won't be able to recover, and it also can mess with your organs too. Consistency, I give it a 9 out of 10 just because overtraining can build up the longer that you don't manage your training. So the longer that you do it, the worse the effects get. Return on investment, I gave it a 10 out of 10 just because prioritizing recovery over overtraining is literally free. It doesn't take any extra time. If anything, it'll give you more time because you'll be training less. So I'm going to be putting that right into our first God tier right there, 28 out of 30. Bango. The next thing we have is calories and macros. So this is another big one. We have an impact of a 10 out of 10. So the reason why I gave it calories and macros a 10 out of 10 because they are literally your fuel in order to recover. So if you literally don't get these, you will not recover. You will not be able to give it your best. So make sure you eat, don't undereat, especially if you're in more of an endurance sport. These are very important, but it also matters for lifting too. You got to get your protein in order to recover. Consistency, I gave it another 10 out of 10 just because if you starve yourself for a day, you will feel it the next day, especially like what I said, endurance training. If you don't get your macros in or your carbs in, you will feel it. If you don't get your protein in, you will feel it. So yes, do not sleep on calories and macros. And for return on investment, 9 out of 10 just because you will have to actually spend money. It's not free, but it's definitely worth it. 9 out of 10 return on investment, you gotta do it. So I'm gonna give this a 29 out of 30. Bango, right at the top of God tier right now, sleeping right there. All right, next we have cold plunge, and I know these are very popular. These have been popular on the internet for the last couple years, but I'm actually gonna be giving the impact a 4 out of 10 just because yes, cold plunges are shown to reduce soreness, but if you use them at the wrong time, it can actually stunt your muscle growth by reducing inflammation in your muscles. And so we don't want that if we want to recover. For consistency, there is a lot of mixed evidence on it right now. There is so we can't really say for sure whether an athlete would like to be doing cold plunge, 100% sure, but I will say the mental health aspects of cold plunge are definitely real. So that is something to keep in mind. For some people, this could go all the way up to God tier, maybe not, but the mental health aspects are definitely there. For return on investment when it comes to recovery, however, I give it a 4 out of 10. Consistency, I give it a 5 out of 10. For return on investment, I give it a 4 out of 10. The reason being because it takes time, it takes discomfort, and it takes access. If you don't have a cold plunge at home, you gotta go look for one or you gotta go buy one. So a total score would be 13 out of 10. bottom of situational, so I'm putting it right there. The next thing we have is compression boots, stuff like Normatec. I've actually used these a lot, and I almost bought some until I did my research, and so now I actually have the impact at 3 out of 10, just because there is evidence that it does reduce perceived soreness. But that's pretty much it. There isn't much evidence that, like actual quality evidence, that shows compression boots actually doing something meaningful for your recovery, especially something that active recovery already does. So compression boots impact 3 out of 10. They pretty much reduce perceived soreness. Consistency, like I said earlier, very little high quality evidence, 3 out of 10 for that. And for return on investment, they can be pretty expensive. They could be like $1,000. So I'm going to give that a 2 out of 10. So that will put it at an 8. So I'm going to put that right above expensive spa treatments right there. The next thing we have is higher tier supplements, stuff like creatine, ashwagandha, melatonin, caffeine, stuff that, there is evidence that shows that it actually works. But in terms of just purely recovery, pretty much all supplements don't really do much, maybe besides creatine and caffeine making you feel good. Creatine is probably the strongest out of those, and creatine helps more with hypertrophy and doesn't really do much for recovery specifically, other than give you like a couple extra reps. And the other supplements in this category do have their uses, so I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10 for its impact. For consistency, 5 out of 10, just because there is limited evidence for recovery for those higher tier supplements. And for return on investment, I just gave it another 5 out of 10, just because costs can add up, but they are much more convenient. So that'll give a total of 15 out of 30. So right above Cold Plunge, right there. The next thing we have is deloads, which you could argue could be in training management, but I just put them separately. For a deloads impact, I would give it an 8 out of 10, just because it does reduce accumulated fatigue and it is important. For consistency, I give it an 8 out of 10, just because it's proven all over the world, from amateur to Olympic caliber, from weightlifting to endurance marathon training. Deloads are proven to be very important. And for the return on investment, I give it a 9 out of 10. At most, you just have to do a bit of planning, but it might save you, so there could be arguments it could be higher, but I give it a 9 out of 10. So that is a total of 25. So that will put it right there. The next thing we have is a detox. Detoxes, I know a lot of people for some reason do, but I do not recommend doing detoxes. The impact for me, I gave it a 0 out of 10. At best, they are useless. At worst, they're actually harmful. It's one of the only things on this list that is worse if you do them. Consistency, 0 out of 10. Your body naturally detoxes on its own. You do not need to do this. And return on investment, 0. Zeros across the board. Worst one on the list by far. Do not do detoxes unless you're maybe guided by your doctor to do them, but I don't even know if doctors recommend detoxes. So the next thing we have is fluid balance. So fluid balance is basically a way of saying hydration plus electrolytes. For fluid balance, I gave it an 8 out of 10, just because it can literally affect performance. If you're dehydrated in any sport, your strength and endurance will go down significantly, but specifically more in endurance. You will definitely notice if you're dehydrated. For consistency, I give it an 8 out of 10 because it applies to pretty much everyone. and there's very strong evidence that it does something for you. Return on investment, I give it an 8 out of 10. Drinking water and getting electrolytes if needed are important and are very cheap if you need to buy them. For most people, you probably don't need electrolytes unless you're doing like an hour plus of cardio. And water, everyone needs to drink enough water, can't be dehydrated. Definitely this one is going to go right here, high impact. That is a 24 out of 30, so in the middle of high impact. All right, so now what we have for our final one, I saved the best for last, in my opinion. Sleep duration, getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night. For impact, I give it a 10 out of 10 just because it has humongous impacts on recovery. It is the backbone of recovery. For consistency, it works every time. Even if you don't feel it, it will impact you within a day or two. Return on investment, 10 out of 10. It's free. You literally don't have to pay anything. 30 out of 30. Undisputed champion right there at the front. So here are my closing thoughts. For me, the biggest mistake people make is trying to optimize recovery at the bottom of the list. Stuff like testosterone boosters, all that stuff, while completely ignoring the top. They're busy buying tools, protocols, chasing shortcuts, when the things that actually drive recovery are super simple and honestly super boring. Sleep, fueling your body, managing your training. If those aren't even locked in, nothing on this list will save you. But if they are, you really don't need 90% of the stuff that people are spending money on. So before you add anything new to your routine, ask yourself, have I actually mastered the basics? Because recovery, to me, isn't about doing more. It's about doing what actually matters and doing that consistently. Until next time, thanks for watching.